Greetings and salutations, and welcome to this episode of Playwright Spotlight. Before we begin, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment down below, even if it's just to say hi. Also, if you happen to know any playwright friends, be sure to share this video with them. If you're listening to us on your favorite podcast platform, be sure to leave a 5-star review and subscribe to the channel. My guest today is a Bay Area playwright whose plays have received dozens of readings and productions, both nationally and internationally. He has been a wildcard finalist 3 times at the Short and Sweet in Sydney, Australia, and is a past finalist for the Heideman Award. His one-act play, Sins Borne, was presented at the Edinburgh Fringe and the Last Frontier Theater Conference in Valdez, Alaska. Other plays include Captive Audition, Stuck in the Middle, the Alpha Bindleman, his noir trilogy of Frankie Payne plays, and my personal favorite and dearest to my heart, Deuce Cooper, the Bloomfield Case, which was part of our 2018 production of Play Noir. He is a member of the Dramatists Guild and is a co-founding member of the Pear Theater Playwrights Guild. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Paul Braverman. How are you, sir?
I'm doing great, James. How are you?
I'm well, thanks. Good to see you, even if it's virtually.
Yeah, well, we'll take it.
We did get the opportunity to meet in person when you came down for Play Noir in 2018. So I appreciate you making the trek for that. I appreciate that. Thank you so much. So there's a lot of questions I want to ask, and I know that you're just coming off returning from the Valdez Theater Festival, the theater conference, which we've had quite a few guests that have discussed it in the past. So I'm going to go ahead and bypass that for now. We might return to it later, but sure. You have your own. Do you have a theater conference of your own that you do? Tell me about the Pear Theater Playwrights Guild. What is this?
The Pear Theater was started back in 2001 or 2002 by a good friend of mine and my wife Robin's named Diane Tasca. As she was starting this theater out, she felt it was important to create a community of playwrights and to nurture that community. And that became the beginnings of what is now the Pear Playwright Guild. The Guild has had as many as 30 members over the years. There's a process by which, one submits and gets invited to join the Guild and so forth. The Guild has been very closely associated with the Pear, really for these last 20 years. Every year at the Pear, there is a production called Pear Slices, which is an evening of several 10 to 15 minute original short plays. I've had several pieces done there. My wife has directed a number of them. So we've been involved with the Guild in that way. These days, our involvement with the Guild is primarily that we lead a development cycle called Fresh Produce, in which any of the Guild members are invited to submit full-length plays or long one-acts, really, whichever. And we actually, kind of took some of the best practices from the Valdez Theater Conference, and we sort of tailored them to our situation. And the whole idea is we pick a 2 or 3 or 4 full-length, new plays, and we give them a reading where there's no props, there's no blocking, there's no design cues or anything like that. It's just actors with music stands, basically reading the plays and trying to make the most intuitive choices possible, so that the writer can really hear the play in its truest form. And it really is. It's a kind of a step that is important to take prior to the actual workshopping of a play. Before you get to that point, does the plot hold up? Do the characters have unique voices? Is the play accomplishing, as a playwright, is it accomplishing what you had in mind? Our process isn't about rewriting the play or telling the writer, no, you know what, a giraffe is funnier than an elephant. It's nothing like that. It's really about helping the writer to hear the play themselves so that they can make the changes needed to get it ready to stand it up.
And you guys are located where?
The Pear is located in Mountain View, California.
And in order to be a member of that guild, do you have to be located? Do you have to be part of that community, or can you be like anywhere else?
I believe you do need to live in the Bay Area 9 counties to be an active member. There are a couple of different membership statuses. So I think if if you're an emeritus member, I don't think you have to be in the Bay Area. But as an active member, even though the meetings actually are held via Zoom, there's still a desire to have this playwright community represent the Bay Area 9 counties.
And can anybody can anybody participate? Can anybody send their work in there, or does it have to be? Is it member based only?
It's member based only, and there is a process by which one can become a member.
Okay.
It involves a few different steps, but I should also point out that I'm very proud and pleased with the Guild and with the Pair in general for the effort being made with respect to diversity and inclusion and equity for underrepresented groups of all kinds. Sure. And then the theater has made tremendous progress, and the Guild in particular has had a process that was really specifically designed to get underrepresented communities involved and to hear those voices and to get them into the Guild, and very pleased to see that's been a very successful effort.
And when you say are you referring to the Pair Guild, or are you referring to the Dramatists Guild itself?
Well, I'm talking about the Pair Guild, although the Dramatists Guild also has been doing some great work with respect to inclusion. But I was referring to the Pair. Perfect. Okay. And I'm sorry. So in order to participate, just as far as a playwright goes, you can still have you can still submit and have your work participated, or you do still have to be a member? You have to be a member. Okay, you do have to be a member. To become a member, there is a process. Okay, can we talk about that process? Pardon me? Can we talk about that process? What is that process? Yeah, in addition to being in the Bay Area 9 counties, then there is a writing sample or a play. Frankly, I don't know specifically what's being asked for submissions these days, but a candidate submits their writing, and several of the Guild members read the submissions, and for fit and for is this person, for lack of a better way to say it, ready to have plays that can be considered for production and that sort of a thing, as opposed to somebody that's really still learning the form. The Guild would probably not be a great place for them to take those next steps. But once the Guild members they make these assessments based on what they perceive as the readiness of the piece that they're seeing, and assuming that the writer's ready, they invite that writer to join the Guild. So I want to touch on 2 points that you just made there. How do you determine whether or not somebody's ready? Yeah, that's a good question. I will say I really haven't been one of those evaluators, so I haven't had to really answer that question myself or as part of the group. But I would suppose what we're looking for here is somebody who understands the art form, the structure, somebody who is whose characters are characters that might exist in a time and in a place, and dialogue that looks like somebody could say it. I don't think the bar is super high, but I do think that you need to be writing plays in order to be an effective member of the Guild. Okay. I can respect that. Now, it was kind of along the other lines. My other question is, do you think that something like the Pair Guild wouldn't you think it would be beneficial for those people that may not be up to that standard yet, where they could still benefit and learn? Or is that not the Guild's job to bring to raise that ship up with that tide? Does that make sense? Yeah, it's really I think a little bit apart. I will say again that the Pear Theater does work with youth theater and with young playwrights to get them ready. There's a lot of really great stuff happening there. But that completely aside, what the Guild is looking for is it's a group of peers, and their primary function is on a biweekly basis. They spend a couple of hours on Zoom reading 10 or 15 pages and giving one another feedback. So you can appreciate that having a strong membership is to everybody's advantage in the Guild, and having a diverse membership is also to everyone's advantage. And I think the Guild has both of those things: a lot of very talented writers and a lot of different voices being heard there now. Right. If you're a newer writer, really just starting out, I don't know that the Guild would be a bad place to be. But I would certainly encourage folks who are just starting to head down that trail to use some of the many resources that are out there to really work more directly with, a writing coach or with a classroom setting or something like that.
Are there resources that you can think of offhand that you would recommend?
Not offhand.
Not to put you on the spot.
There's plenty of educational opportunities in the area, in the Bay Area anyway, and I'm sure that's true in many places nationally. The Bay Area does happen to have a particularly great theater community. I think, I'm sure you've known a number of artists from this area, and it's a great place to be writing, great place to be acting and doing theater work, pandemic notwithstanding.
Sure. No, absolutely. 100%. And I do want to keep going with the Pear, even though it is kind of regional based. I do like the idea that other listeners could kind of take this idea and go forward into their community and kind of build something similar.
Sure.
So how did that get started?
Well, it got started with the founder of the theater, who had a number of friends, including myself, who were, what we referred to as emerging playwrights. That's a term that I know is grating for some folks, and it's ambiguous in any event.
We got to start somewhere.
That's right. So there were several of us who were, I wrote my first play when I was 10 and my second play when I was 40. And, wow. And there were several others of us who were just really starting to head down that trail. And so we just kind of sat down and we started reading our stuff with each other every other Wednesday night. It's still every other Wednesday night, 20 years later. Wow. And none of us who were involved at that point are still actively participating. I work with the Guild on this development thing, but I'm not actively attending the sessions or what have you, and I haven't for quite some time. But that's how it started. There was just a small group of friends, really, who were all, sort of starting out writing plays all at the same time. And a few of us have gone on to stick with that and have been writing plays ever since. Others, sort of vectored off and did other things. Eventually, the group started to grow, and it got to the point where we had to have rules, where there had to be, a charter of some kind, and there had to be some kind of guidelines for membership and participation. For several years, we had a guild of 20 writers who had, a very real full production opportunity once a year with Slices, this short play festival. How many playwrights can say in their first 10 years of writing that they had essentially a 1 in 20 chance of getting produced?
Sure.
That's pretty remarkable. And I can assure you that none of us ever took that for granted for, 1 second. We all fully understood what a great thing, had been created. But it, as the Guild grew and as the Pear Theater grew, we started getting more folks in from other parts of the Bay Area and writers we didn't know, but we had read their work. And from there, it really just kind of took off. Eventually, Robin and I attended what was then called the Albee Conference, but is now referred to as the Valdez Theater Conference. And we were so just impressed with the process, putting aside the aesthetic of being at Valdez and the amenities and all the other stuff. Just the process by which the plays were being presented and the feedback was being harvested, by the playwright. We were very attracted to that. And so we implemented something very much like that, again, tailored for our situation, but something very much like that here for the Pear and for the Guild members. And that continues on. The membership has grown. It's become more diverse, as I mentioned. And now the artistic director at the Pear, St. Jones, a great artist, is now working very actively with the Pear on other kinds of projects, collaborative writing projects and community writing projects and things of that nature. So it's really grown to something, frankly, far more than what was originally considered. And that's terrific.
When you decided to branch out and bring in more members, what were the determining factors to decide I'm going to bring this person on back when you first got involved? Just going back and saying, if there's other communities that want to kind of follow in your footsteps, what were the next steps? What were the, stipulations or guidelines?
The next step was probably not the best next step for us to take, which was,
sometimes they're not.
Do you have a pulse? Do you live in the Bay Area 9 counties? Have you written something? Don't care if it's a play. Have you written something? Yeah, the answer is yes. Come on in. The water's fine. Okay. And what we discovered was that wasn't great. Because, we're a Playwrights Guild. So for people just starting out, it was a difficult time for them. And so we refined that eventually and got to the point where somebody joining the guild had to demonstrate that they understood the art form and that they were a person that wrote plays. And although they've refined that in ways that I can't be specific about today, sure, that's fundamentally still how it works.
And you mentioned you had to have a charter and some guidelines and things. Like, what were some of those things that you had to implement or had to lay out and say, hey, look, these are our requirements. These are what we expect.
Let me hasten to say that I had little to do with the creation of a lot of these guidelines, not because I'm not trying to distance myself from them. But,
fair enough. No,
but a whole new group of people came on and really took over, the running of the guild and did a remarkable job kind of evolving it. And one of the things they realized is that having a lot of people in the guild who weren't active in the guild was not a good thing.
Right.
For many years, the guild met in folks' homes. That hasn't been the case for several years now, but for the first 15 years or so of the guild, the meetings were held in people's living rooms. So there really had to be a cap on the number of folks. Right. And yet you still wanted those folks to be active. So there were participation guidelines wherein, and there still are, wherein you have to attend a certain number of meetings and or submit or participate in a certain number of programs, or work with the theater in some way. But one way or the other, you really had to have some level of activity with that theater community in the guild in order to stay active in the guild and continue to have the opportunity to submit and participate in the biweekly meetings. So that was one of them. That's probably the big one, really, is that you participate. And for most folks, while that can be a challenge, on a biweekly basis, for most folks, some combination of attending some meetings and submitting something and, maybe ushering at the theater, stuff like that. I think most folks are able to make that happen.
Going back to saying, when you mentioned that, didn't matter what kind of writing, as long as you were a writer and you had a pulse. Yeah. What do you think that, what obstacles do you think that playwrights encounter opposed to people who write in other mediums?
Playwriting and theater is a very, very fundamentally collaborative thing. So if you're a playwright and your work never gets read by actors, you're not, what's the word? Consummated. I don't know.
Sure.
You're not doing theater yet. You're still, sort of in the preparatory stages. If you have a play and you have a bunch of actors and you're all in a theater and you're doing a play, but there's nobody in the audience, then you're having a rehearsal. When the audience is there, the circuit is completed and you've got theater. When you're writing a book, you write the book, there's editing, there's collaboration of a sort, but you don't have the design element. You don't have actors interpreting your words. It's you and it's the audience member. It's pretty much a straight line. But in the world of theater, it's a circle. It's not a straight line. And there's a bunch of other folks in that circle besides you. So what I've noticed is that folks who come from the world of writing prose, if you will, novels and short stories or children's books, and I've seen great plays from folks who do all of those things. But the challenge is coming over from that world into the theater world and recognizing that, your stage direction may or may not happen. Your detailed description of the living room set. You know what? The curtains may not have little pictures of elephants and giraffes on them. In fact, there may not be curtains. And if there don't need to be curtains, there probably won't be. That's a big change when you've got your mind's eye has created this picture as a writer, and you're used to that in the long form form factor. And then you sit down to watch your play, your first rehearsal, and your stage direction is being ignored, and just stuff's happening. It's just a completely different process. But that's what it takes to bring it to realization, as opposed to a novel, which takes, editing and publishing.
How detailed do you go into with your stage directions in that regard? And the design that you include in your stage directions, if you will.
Yeah, for me, stage directions are only as required. I happen to write a lot of physical comedy, the Deuce Cooper plays, and there's several of them now. I think 4 or 5 altogether, including, by the way, one that just got read up in Valdez. But those plays have a fair amount of physical comedy in them. So I try not to put in every single dot and dash about the physicality of a piece. But if there's a physical thing happening that's a part of the action, I certainly put it in the stage direction. What I don't put in the stage direction is, he says smugly, in parentheses, or, none of that stuff. I try very hard not to direct from the page. I try to put in the stage instruction that's required because it's not intuitive, because it's a shift, because it's driving the action, and the group of designers wouldn't necessarily know that if I didn't tell them.
Do you use parentheticals? Do you think they're necessary? Do you object to them?
The only parentheticals I use is when character A is talking to character C instead of character B.
Okay.
That kind of thing. Because that's something that really you could have wasted time in rehearsal there while everyone tries to figure that stuff out. But on the other hand, trying to figure out whether the character is happy or sad or angry in that moment, the process by which the director and the actor figure that out is an important part of delivering the material in a believable fashion. So I think it's important to leave that part of it open for interpretation.
So even if it's against what you had in your mind as far as how this line is delivered, for lack of a better phrase, you're still like, it's not my place at this point. I'm going to get, not even as a guideline, you won't use that parenthetical, whether it's like softly or, harshly or whatever. As far as the delivery goes, you'll leave that still. It's like, I kind of imagine it this way, but it's not my interpretation. And that goes back to the collaborative aspect. Is that what you're saying?
It's not really. What I'm saying is, that would be just a little torturous for me, actually. What I'm saying is, if the actor's intuitive choice is something other than what I had in mind, I probably didn't do my job in the run up to that moment. That's really the way I look at it. If I have to tell an actor you're angry here, then I haven't done the work up to that point for the actor to organically arrive at that conclusion. So to me, when an actor has a take on a line that's completely different from what I thought, hey, maybe it works better. But if it doesn't, if it takes us away from where we're going or what I'm trying to get accomplished, then I take a look at how we got there and try to rehash what led up to the moment.
Sure. And I go back and forth with myself. I just finished the first draft of a full length myself. And I'm, when I go through and I workshop, like with, there's a festival up in Sacramento called Linnea. And so I workshop with some of the kids there and do a lot of work with the originally written one-act plays, and even sometimes with, when we get the noir submissions and whatnot, working with the Collegiate Playwright Festival, it's like I can recognize it and guide when it's not my work. And I can still kind of recognize them. Like, I know better. I'm going to use a parenthetical here that I probably shouldn't. And I don't want to be a hypocrite in those regards either. But I also find, I'm kind of like, I get what you're saying, but I'm still kind of torn in that regard, is like, maybe it's something that I do need to go back and revisit myself then. Am I being clear in that regard?
Well, having worked with a lot of new material and really my wife, Robin, has done so much more of this than me. She's been involved in the development oh gosh, well over 100 plays. And, this is just a thing that just keeps coming up, particularly with newer writers who are still learning the form, or writers who maybe haven't done a lot of acting and therefore haven't, been around a lot of rehearsal halls. That's okay. Paradigm change always comes from the outside, right? So you try to keep an open mind all the time about, what's happening in the rehearsal room. But I think it's important for new writers to really make that pivot, particularly if they've done a lot of writing of long form and, whether it's novels or short stories or whatever it is. When you make the shift into theater, it's a different animal for sure.
Well, I do want to touch on that as well. So because working with new material and stuff, or new writers, what are some of the, I brought this question up a number of times. I hate to use the word mistakes. What are some of the common pitfalls, for lack of a better word, that you find that new or emerging playwrights commit?
Well, the biggest one is what we've been talking about, which is this, this picture that a writer might get in their mind's eye about what a set looks like, and then an exhaustive description on the page. Not only is that doing the designer's work, but it also consumes valuable paper real estate that's much better used for your dialogue. So, in real terms, particularly if you're dealing with a time limitation, like a 10 or a 15-minute play, it's just not worth the real estate to do it, let alone the fact that you're doing someone else's job, really. So that's probably the big one. But I think another very common challenge I see, and one that a trap I fall into, and I'm sure we all are challenged with this to some extent, and that is making sure that each character has a distinctive voice, and that the voice is never necessarily the playwright's voice. I mean, maybe if you're writing something autobiographical, or in some other reason you've decided this character is going to be me, there's nothing, that's fine. It's a perfectly legitimate choice. But otherwise, each character needs to have kind of their own unique thing happening.
How do you achieve that?
Personally, I do it by making sure that every character in every play I write is based on someone or something. It might be an animal, it might be a TV character, it might be somebody I went to school with, it might be a piece of furniture. I based a character on a desk once. It can happen. But something to give that character their own specificity, their own objectives, their own, what's the story that character is the hero of. And I'll tell you who taught me this lesson in reverse. It was none other than Shakespeare, because I had the misfortune of being cast as Aegeus once in Midsummer Night's Dream. It's like, oh man, this poor guy, he comes out and he gives a 5-minute, or not 5-minute, but a 2 or 3 minute soliloquy of exposition that completely lacks anything respective to Aegeus. And then he goes away. It's a 5-act play. We see him again in the 5th act when he comes back and kind of does the same thing to wrap things up. It's like, okay, so you've got two soliloquies, or I guess monologues, whatever you want to call them. You've got 4 minutes of stage time. Your character has no objectives, no meaning, doesn't really do anything. It's a producer's role, right? This is a role, give it to the producer. I try not to, with all due respect to the great William Shakespeare, who indeed had to find roles for a lot of people. I think it's important for every actor to be excited about the role they're playing. So I try to do that and make sure that every character is based on something specific, just to make sure that they don't just generically sound like me or like other characters.
So if you have a character based on a table, or did you say desk? Did you say desk?
I said desk. Yeah.
Okay, desk. How does that translate onto the page?
Yeah, well, this happened to be an old writing desk from my stepdad's home, from 30 years ago or whatever it was. And it was kind of stodgy. And it was one of those desks where it was beautiful and it had these delightful little nooks and crannies and little drawers in it and stuff. But the area on which you could actually do anything was not even big enough for a piece of 8.5 by 11 paper. And so I thought to myself, this desk is perfect example of form over function. And that became kind of the catch for this particular character. Their objective wasn't, I don't recall exactly, what they were doing. I think it was somebody in law enforcement who was much more interested in, is my belly flat? Does the uniform look good? Should my hat be at an angle, or should I be wearing it straight? Those are the kind of objectives that this character was focused on. And it gave that character some specificity that made him not just a cop.
Okay. And going back to the stage directions and the overwriting, if you will, how do you recommend, if you're working directly with those students or playwrights, how do you get them to adjust? What would be the advice you gave them, or the instruction you would give them to correct that and say, just cross this out, you don't need it? I mean, how do you approach that without getting them offended or hurt or bothered?
Yeah, I think a lot of the fussiness comes from a couple of things. First of all, anyone who's seen a Broadway play realizes that there's nothing that's impossible on a stage if you really want to do it. But of course, most of us are probably not writing for the Broadway stage. Even most people who do this for a living aren't writing for the Broadway stage, let alone those of us, who are doing it for the love of the art. So you've got to let go of the idea of that kind of stagecraft is going to be a part of your production. So my encouragement to writers, this is just my own personal preference, but I encourage newer writers to really think about theater from a black box perspective. And just remember that ultimately it's about engagement of the audience. And one of the great ways to engage an audience is to have essence of something on the stage instead of a detailed or an attempted detailed version of something. So using Deuce Cooper's office as the perfect example. We don't need to have a 1940s detective office to a fare thee well that looks like I could film it and it would look like you'd see on television or the movies. Not only do we not need that, but my theory is that reduces the engagement of a theater audience in most cases. So I want the audience I want to have just enough there so that the audience knows that it's the detective's office, but let the audience's brain fill in the rest. Give them half a window and let the audience's mind fill out the rest of the office and the window. And it creates a heightened level of engagement, I think, in theater that differentiates theater from, we're in a room, the lights are out, a promise as an audience member, a promise has been made to you. It's really a very different thing than the other media that we might be writing for.
Sure.
So I encourage them to think about it that way and say, look, if the designers decide that tell the designers it's a beat up 1940s crappy looking detective's office. That's all they need to know. Sure.
No, and that's kind of think what my draw to noir was when we first started doing it back in 2012 is that it's a style and genre that lends itself to simplicity. It does not take a lot, to achieve much. As far as the street corners go, and as far as the detective office, the seedy bar, you can do so much with so little,
Well,
not to mention lighting and sound.
That speaks to another important point, I think. Excuse me. It speaks to another important point, which is the idea of genre. As you probably know about me, I'm a big fan of genre. Not everything I write is in a genre like this, but a lot of it is. And that kind of comes from my background in improv, where I did a lot of long form improv. And, sometimes one of the questions that always comes up after long form improv is, well, you guys decided beforehand that it was, going to be this or it was going to be that. You talked about some things, right? It's like, no, we didn't. What we've done is in rehearsal, if you want to call it that, we've done 20 long form noirs. Each one was different, but we're using a genre. So we've got a grab bag of genre icons to grab from and common understandings of what is expected or reasonable in this world. And the world can be, that world can be anything, and it can be crazy in terms of what is reasonable within it. But as long as everybody knows that that's what it is, then, you've got this common grab bag. And that's true of theater audiences to a certain extent as well. Sure, you're in a theater, but, maybe you've seen The Maltese Falcon. You've at least heard of it probably. And in most cases, you probably have seen it. So it becomes a lot easier to relate that vibe, to what you're seeing on stage, even if what you're seeing on stage is a black box and there's black cubes and there's, half a desk and just one chair.
And I'm glad that you brought it up as far as long form goes. We've talked about it before on whether or not improv helps playwriting, which I think it does, but I think there's a difference. And I think that, I'm kind of an improv snob, if you will. I don't think, I think with a lot of, at least in the States or whatever, I think a lot of people think that improv is, whose line is it anyways?
Yeah, that's right.
Which it's, as far as I'm concerned, it's not. Those are theater games, but it's far from improv. And once you go through a long form program, whether that, I don't know what there is up in the Bay Area. Down here, it was UCB, Upright Citizens Brigade. I went through IO West, Improv Olympic West, which is not around anymore, unfortunately. But long form improv is so much more extravagant, for lack of a better word. And I think that it really kind of helps out a lot because, and I think it helps out as far as acting goes too, not to go off in the acting aspect, but when you can have everything stripped away from you, you have no script, you have no set, you have no props, it makes you that much more secure as an actor. And I'm sure it does as a playwright as well.
It helped me in both respects. It's in my, when I turned 40, I started getting active in theater and I acted in several plays. And in a couple of those plays, other people on stage went up on their lines, pretty big, actually. And I did not know what to do. I knew their lines, but I didn't know what to do. And it took me out of the moment. So improv definitely helped me in that regard. Now, as an actor, it's like whatever happens here, I know who I am. I know what I'm doing. So whatever happens, that's what I'm doing. And we're just going to find our way to, whatever's going to happen next. As a writer, it was very, very helpful to me in terms of shutting down the internal editor. Collaborative storytelling inevitably leads to, let's just say, questionable choices. And when they happen, they're out. There is no backspace key on stage. So you're dealing with it now. Guess what? That's what it is. And your job is to make that a great choice and to do something more with it. Yes, and in other words. So yeah, improv is very useful in all of those ways. Whose line is it? Those are professional comedians. They're brilliant. They're hilarious. They are paid to be funny every 10 seconds. And most of us can't be and just aren't. So you're exactly right. Improv for me was about the acting and it was about the writing. And up here, Bay Area Theater Sports is one. There's many resources up here, just a ton. But Bay Area Theater Sports is the one I went through at Fort Mason here in San Francisco. One of the best in the country, some of the best coaches in the country as well. I felt very, very fortunate to have access to them. And believe me, I picked their brains as much as I could. Sure.
Well, I think there's another misconception as well, as far as improv goes, is it has to be funny.
Right. Some of the best improv I've been in had no real laughs in it whatsoever, except for a nervous jitter or two.
Well, that was the one thing I did like about IO. They focused on the relationship between the characters. And so there were some very, really heartwarming moments that I saw in some of the best things that I'd ever seen. And it wasn't about, trying to get the laugh or anything like that. There were some charming moments and there was some humor, but that doesn't mean it had to be funny. So,
totally agree.
Yeah. So that's that regard. Are there any other pitfalls that you find that beginning playwrights make before we move on from that, just in case? Or
well, those are probably there's plenty. monologues, too many monologues, characters talking at each other. There's a lot of stuff that really you just got to kind of hear your work read aloud. I would think the single best tip I can give to any writer, though, and I'm sure you've heard it as well, is read your stuff out loud before you give it to anybody, and you'll catch your tongue twisters and you'll catch your word drops and stuff like that.
Okay, and that's even before getting a group together and read. Just read it to yourself out loud.
Yeah, absolutely. I do everything out loud. Sometimes I write it out loud, but I always read it out loud.
Good to know. Good to know. Let's talk about the Heideman Award, because I'm not familiar with this. What is the Heideman Award?
Well, it's gone now. For many years, the Heideman Award was through the theater in the City Theater in Miami, which is still around, and they still focus on short work, and they still have a national contest. But I believe it was them. You know what? I'm going to correct myself. I think the Heideman Award was from Louisville, Kentucky, from a theater in Louisville. But every year they offered up, they had a submission process, and 50 or 60, I think, plays or so would be finalists, and they would pick 7 or 8 of them that would get produced at, I believe, the City Theater in Miami, which is why I think I got confused about the 2 theaters. But the Heideman Award actually came out of Louisville. And
they don't do it anymore. Do you know why?
I don't know why, no.
Should there be a Braverman Award then that gets started up in the Bay Area then to kind of replace it?
It probably currently lacks the credentials that it needs, to have the distinction that the Heideman did.
In due time then.
But maybe someday.
Let's touch base a little bit on Valdez. Sure. At some point, this is the Playwright Spotlight is going to be that it's going to either get sponsored by the Valdez, because we cover Valdez, I think, in almost half of our episodes so far, because we always seem to have playwrights that frequent that. How was this year's? What can you tell us from your perspective about this festival?
It's
not festival, conference, I should say.
Yeah, the conference is just an event I'd recommend to anybody, and any playwright who's got a piece that they'd like to hear read developmentally. It's of course far more than that. The Play Lab is, the kind of the centerpiece of the experience, and that involves, I think it might be at this point it might be 70 or 80 playwrights are accepted. I think they've increased the number of plays they're taking now and eliminated some seminars and things like that to make more room for it. Wow. The way that it works is that your play is read in front of a group of peers, and the conference has a number of featured artists, 15 or 20 theater professionals, many people of real distinction and accomplishment. They all know what they're doing, all these featured artists. 3 of them are in the room to hear your play and give you feedback, right after the reading. There's also feedback gathered from the room itself. One of the featured artists is your lead respondent. And at some point before the conference is over, you sit down one-on-one with that lead respondent. And you have a nice 30-minute one-on-one with them about the play. What are you trying to do with it? Here's some observations I have. Everyone's very careful not to rewrite your play. It's hard when you're giving feedback not to rewrite someone's play, frankly, but everyone works very hard at that. The vibe is kept very positive. That doesn't mean that no one gets constructive input, because of course they do. In addition to that, it's worth noting that there's a very large group of actors there as well. Gosh, maybe 100 actors, maybe more. So other playwrights also get involved in the acting up there. But the point is that these are really talented casts of actors reading the plays. There's a nice monologue workshop that the actors are invited to go through, and the playwrights get an opportunity to submit monologues and hear them done by actors who have been coached during the week by some very, very talented, 2 very talented acting coaches, Laura Gardner and Frank Carlson. Plus Rob Lacrone actually joins them now as well. And a voice coach, Ben Corbett. These are all, very, very talented people. And for the $100, to attend the conference, you can get this world-class coaching. And in addition to that, there's a number of other activities that take place. There's a late night theater fringe that's always a great deal of fun. There's evening performances, productions, and things like that. So you're in Valdez, and it is a spectacular setting, just spectacular. The first time I went to Valdez, we pulled up into the hotel parking lot, got out, and right over our head was an eagle being chased by a bunch of seagulls.
Oh, geez.
And it's like, well, we're not in the Bay Area anymore. Although actually we do have eagles here, but that's really beside the point. The spectacular setting, right there on Prince William Sound. In fact, it's so beautiful that to first-time attendees, I always say the same thing, which is you need to find a morning or an afternoon or carve out some time and just go absorb the geography here. It is phenomenal. And it's going to keep tapping you on the shoulder and saying, hey, here's a spectacular view while you're walking up to the conference center or whatever. So my wife and I have been to this now, 7 or 8 times at this point. And it's always good. It's different. It changes around each year a little bit.
What was different this year?
Well, what was different this year? Well, one thing that was different this year was that there were fewer seminars and other activities competing with the plays that were being read in the labs. The idea being, let's have less of these other activities so that more people are available to go hear the plays and provide the feedback. So that worked out really well. Another thing that changed around is I mentioned the late night fringe. That's one of those you had to be there to really appreciate it. It's just a great deal of fun with actors and writers and theater professionals all kind of letting loose in a very safe environment. That changed around a little bit. It's outdoors now, which is great. In the time of COVID, the more stuff you can do outdoors, the better. Frankly.
Sure. When do you guys sleep?
Yeah,
it doesn't sound like there's much time for that.
No, there isn't. I always come back from that conference in a desperate need for a vacation. It's hard to sleep. It's the activities sometimes don't end until midnight or later, and the
sun's still out, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yeah, that's right. The sun goes down. Well, if you want to call it down, it's like there's 3 or 4 hours of something that's very dusky, and then basically the sun comes back up. So blackout curtains are key up there. That's for sure.
Sure.
But yeah, it's a very peculiar feeling if you haven't done it before, walking out of a bar at midnight and putting sunglasses on.
What are, can you tell me some of the examples of past seminars or even seminars that they did this year that people can expect?
Yeah, they really didn't do the seminars this year.
Like barely at all.
I don't think there were any, actually.
Oh, really? Okay.
If there was, I didn't notice it. In the past, there's been a number of seminars about the business of playwriting, about copywriting, about a collaboration, about design work. Just really, you can think of an aspect of theater, and it's been covered in a seminar there.
What other, so you had mentioned one seminar and then I forgot which one I was going to bring it up that I wanted you to expand on. When it comes to design, I mean, what does a design seminar work for playwriting?
There was a seminar years ago that was with a couple of folks who do, different kinds of design work. And it was to talk to playwrights about, working with designers in a production environment.
Would that be like, hey, here's something to avoid? Like, this is what we would do based on, this is what you wrote. This is what we're going to do. And look at how much we can achieve with how much little you.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Do you have advice on that? I mean, how much design aspect do you put into your plays?
As little as possible. I love to let design's not my thing. I like to let designers do design. My goal is to communicate what I'm trying to get done. And if I'm successful at that, I'm confident that a good designer will go to town with that. And that certainly has been my experience.
What's your favorite element of playwriting?
My favorite element of playwriting. I guess if I'm going to be completely candid, my favorite element of playwriting is moving an audience, either getting a great laugh or knowing that I've moved or affected audience members in some way.
Do you know while you're in the process of writing, do you know when you've achieved that?
Sometimes. Yeah, there's been a couple of times when I've made myself cry. There's been a few times when I've made myself laugh. And generally speaking, if I've done that to myself, then my experience is that the audience will do that too. Now, routinely, I don't laugh at my own material at all. And I just am left, until it's produced or read, I'm left to wonder, is that funny? I don't know.
Right.
Hope so. But if something tickles me, then I usually end up with a level of confidence that this is going to be good. If something moves me, if I'm like, man, I'm having a hard time getting through this, then chances are it's going to move the audience. Have
you been wrong before?
Yes. Oh God, yes. Particularly with laughs. But that's why you have it read out loud. And I've killed so many lines. Particularly, probably 80% of what I've written is comedy, and I've redlined a lot of jokes that I thought were great and they weren't.
Was it just in this particular piece, or did you completely? Because there's certain playwrights you talk to, and they're like, okay, it didn't work here, but I'll save it, I'll shelve it for another play down the road. Or did you just like, this doesn't work at all? It's not funny. I'm just put it.
Yeah, no, I don't. If I've redlined something, it's dead to me.
Fair enough. All right. When do you know you're done?
That's a great question.
With any particular piece.
Yeah. I have a hard time expressing that, but I know. And with most plays, I'm not done. Most plays, when I open them up, no matter why I'm opening them up, if I crack open a file and I start reading it, it's almost impossible for me not to change it. In fact, that's why in most cases, if I'm reviewing a play for some reason, I look at a PDF just because editing is so much harder. It's like, well, I'm going to have to go through several steps here if I want to edit this thing. So I restrain myself. Most plays, no matter how many times they've been produced, if I crack that play open, I'm at risk of changing it. There are exceptions though, and the Deuce Cooper play you mentioned, the Bloomfield case, is one of them. I'm like, no, I'm really done with that. That play's been produced a half dozen times now. There's a dozen versions of it. It finally got winnowed down to what I wanted it to be by the time your team did it. And it's like, no, that's it. I don't.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I don't see anything that needs to be done with that.
Yeah, I felt like I got it to the length that it works at. I'm not a predetermined length, just a good length that it works at. And it was successful the last couple of times I saw it, so I thought, okay, great, we're in good shape here.
I like that advice of because I'm right there with you. Is like I have a tendency, and that's why I finally gotten to the point where I try not to edit anymore as I write. I've tried to get to a point where I just want to finish now. Then I'll go back, because otherwise I will work on the same 20 pages. So, but I think that's a really wonderful piece of advice as far as, when you've quote unquote completed it, saving it as a PDF and then going back and rereading it. Do you do that after the first draft, or do you do that like after the second or third pass? How many passes do you take?
Oh, I've had some plays that had 50 passes and others that had one. So it really does vary. The Alpha Bindleman, a play that got nominated for the Heideman Award, that just tumbled out more or less word for word in it what I refer to as its final form. That's one of those ones that's like, this just came out like a nugget. I wrote it on an airplane. I started it when the plane took off, and by the time we were wheels down, the play was done. I've probably changed 10 words in it, after that, if that. Boom, one take and it was done. There's been other plays that I've done 50 changes, and if I open it again, it'll be 51.
What do you attribute that flow to when you finish that, the Alpha Bindleman? What do you attribute that to being able to sit down and get that flow out?
It's just it's a feeling. I wish that I could quantify it in some way or even qualify it, but really it's just like, that's good. I got nothing more on this. And
where do you find your ideas? What inspires you to write? What makes you sit down and say this is a play?
They come from all over. I wrote a play called Stuck in the Middle that's about 3 hot dogs on a rotisserie, talking about the nature of life, and a number of, and probably that's probably my most produced play, and it's the play that the most people have asked me, where in the world did you come up with that? And it was an intersection, and intersecting is where a lot of my ideas come from. But in this case, it was an intersection between working with a director who was actually, in fact, directing the original version of Deuce. And he on the way to rehearsal, we'd sometimes carpool together, and he would stop at 7-Eleven and he'd go in and get, some of that stuff, not necessarily a hot dog, but you go in and grab a pre-made sandwich and an enormous bag of chips or something. And I'm like, oh man, I can't eat like that. But I went in with him once, and I just went over and I looked at that sad rotisserie thing, and I thought, how old are those hot dogs? And how could anyone walk in here and look at one of those and say, man, I'm hungry, I could go for one of those things. And at the same time, I was thinking about the challenges in our country with, red states and blue states and all of that. And that kind of informs this play, because there's a hot dog on the left-hand side of the rotisserie and a hot dog on the right-hand side of the rotisserie. You can probably imagine where it goes from there. So,
yes. And now I want to unpack this. I want you to steel man this, because I have a beef with this, no pun intended, on the hot dog aspect.
That's okay. There's no beef in those things.
Okay. Fair enough. I have a really big issue, and I know this is my issue. I have an issue with personification of things. Explain it to me. Explain to me how this works, that you can write a play about hot dogs.
Empathy. It's a play about empathy. It's not a play about hot dogs. It's a play about empathy. Ultimately, that is what the play about. The hot dog in the middle can't rotate properly, and the hot dog on the left and the hot dog on the right both have all kinds of prescriptions for that hot dog in the middle that can't rotate properly. But all of those prescriptions come from their own points of view, one of which is informed by the news rack that it rotates past, and the other one that's steeped in its own ignorance.
Fair enough. And I guess that's the difference. I guess that because what you've done is you've actually put some meaning and depth behind it, whereas every personified play that I've ever watched, whether it's between a sperm and an egg, 2 black widow spiders, a haunted house and its new owner, I'm like, it does not work.
Yeah, because those are plays about ideas, right? It's like, I've got a really cool idea, but that's a great basis for a sketch on Saturday Night Live, but I don't know if it's a play.
Yeah, that's probably the difference, because so all right, okay, all right. Again, that's why I do this podcast to learn as well. Okay.
It's about empathy. I wrote another play called United We Stand, which consists of fairy tale characters, all from public domain, I might add, not coincidentally. And there's human characters from fairy tales, and there's animal characters from fairy tales, and then there's an inanimate character. And this play was actually about the Tea Party, the creation of the Tea Party, and the fact that in a 3-party situation, the minority party rules because they can hop over to either of the other two parties to create a majority. And so therefore, back in 2010, the Tea Party got all kinds of power, and we're still dealing with the implications of that today. So I use the inanimate objects in fairy tales to represent the Tea Party, because there's fewer, there's in this case, it was the spoon from the little dog laughed to see such sport, in the dish with the spoon. Right. So the spoon comes in representing inanimate objects, trying to barter an agreement with the animals and humans in fairy tale world, so that they can all get back to their stories. So again, it could have just been a sketch in Saturday Night Live about a spoon being in love with the dish. But I tried to really make it a play about kind of the danger of where we were in 2010. Sure.
What's your process when you come up with an idea? Where do you go from there? How much?
I go to one of two places: the trail or the shower. Okay. But whatever gets oxygen into my brain, I don't go to a keyboard. When I get an idea or a thought about a story, I immediately head into the development of the characters and the plot, and I do that work away from the keyboard. I do it with a pen and paper, either out on the trail or in the shower, and then scramble out and make notes and stuff like that.
And how much detail of character do you go into, and what do you cover?
Well, I try to create a basic character framework. Who is this person? What are they doing? What do they need? What's in their way? And I try not to go much farther than that until I start writing, because, as I'm sure you can attest, there's a lot of discovery in the writing process. And at some point, the characters take over. You get into the dialogue flow of it, and at some point the characters take over and things get discovered. And I certainly stay open to that. So I try not to head too far down that development trail before I'm really having characters talk to each other.
And what was the other aspect you cover when you hit the trail of the shower? Character and what was the other one? Plot.
Yeah, what's happening here? It's always starts from this point of view. What do I want to say? What do I feel like saying? The Deuce Cooper plays is the exception to that, or are the exception to that, because really what I'm saying is, let's have some fun. The Deuce Cooper plays really aren't particularly thematic, if you will, but in my other pieces, it comes from a place of, well, I'm upset about this, or I really want to make a statement about that. What's a good way to get at that? And start noodling it around. And then when I hit on something, that's when I start to dig in, whether that's out on the trail or whether that's in some other fashion. I just get the blood flowing and get myself a framework and get to the computer.
And how long do you give that? How much time do you give that before you finally sit down?
Yeah, it's a great question too. If I was doing this full time, I would probably give it less time than I give it now, but I have a full-time career, completely apart from theater. Yeah. So I have to be, very jealous with my theater-based time and very disciplined with it. But it can sometimes take weeks. It can take weeks from the time I had an idea. This whiteboard over my shoulder, those are all things that's the parking lot. Those are all things that are waiting for me to have the opportunity to go hit the trail for that particular story.
Sure. I'm going to wind up going back to this because I lost my train of thought with the question. I wanted to follow up with that. What are the differences, though, between the Deuce plays and your Frankie Payne plays, considering they're both noir?
Yeah, Frankie Payne plays are definite dramas that have humorous moments. Deuce Cooper plays are just full on, not just comedies, but silly comedies. Right. They're it's not intended to be a statement about noir. Quite the contrary. If it's a statement about noir at all, it's how much I love it.
No, I would definitely I wouldn't say it's a statement against it by any means. It's a lot of fun.
It's not satire of noir. whatsoever. It's a humorous homage, using the elements of noir to really just have some fun. And a lot of the humor in the Deuce plays, comes outside of noir, comes from having fun with language and fun with words and convention and fun with genre as well.
And then the Frankie Payne.
Frankie Payne is it's very gritty. The original idea for Frankie Payne was I wrote the first one back in 2009, I think it was. And what I wanted to do was to take the kind of burned out detective convention and shift it so that the burned out detective was a female instead of a male. I wanted to write a series of plays where this burned out alcoholic female private eye was actually in control of almost everything and was several steps ahead of all of her male adversaries. And that's the framework in all three plays. They're substantially different in terms of the plot lines. They all, however, are set in East Boston. They all involve real activities. The first Frankie Payne play is set at the time of the Boston Irish gang wars. That was a real thing that happened over two gangsters that got in a fight over a girl. And I don't know, 36 guys got killed over it over the span of about 15 years or so. That was the start of what was called the Winter Hill Gang, and which is the gang eventually that Whitey Bulger joined and eventually led. But this play is set before his time. The second play is set a year and a half later, which was the time of the Boston Strangler, and is very much informed by all of that chaos that was going on in Boston at the time. And the third play is set again in the time of the gang wars, but this time by the time the FBI had become involved, which also was a real thing that really happened. So I set them around real, very sad, very serious events in which Frankie Payne, the lead, was in very real peril. So she had to overcome, very much life-threatening obstacles. But at the same time, she would crack wise. She had a flippant comment for everybody, and really we worked hard in the development process of those plays to really make sure everything moved along and that each of the characters was the hero of their own part of the story.
These are full length?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. In fact, the first one was presented at Valdez years ago. It got a development reading up there. And as a result of that development reading, that No Good Deed, which was the first Frankie Payne play, went from being about 2 hours and 10 minutes with an intermission to being 87 minutes and no intermission.
Wow. Do you write from beginning to end, or do you jump all over and say, I know I've got this scene here in my head, I'm going to write this, and then I'll figure out how to get to it later? Or do you just like scene one, act one, scene one, scene two?
Hey, just a heads up, your video's gone a little fuzzy.
Good to know. Yeah, I've got a little connection thing that's saying it's a little low, which I don't understand why. So going back linearly, do you write from act one, scene one to the end, or do you jump around a bit?
On the full lengths, I almost never wrote from beginning to end. And my short plays, I do write from beginning to end. In fact, I write them improvisationally, which is to say with if the play is less than 20 minutes, I'm going to write it at the beginning and go to the end, even if I don't like where it's going, and just to kind of get it out there. And hey, I've got a backspace key, I've got a delete key, I can do whatever I need to do, but I get it out there that way first. With my longer one acts and the full length plays, I almost never write them fully chronologically. Usually there's I've been inspired by a monologue, or boy, this is going to be a really special moment. I'm inspired by it right now. I'm going to go write it right now. I may not use it, or I may use it. I may keep it. I may change it, but I'm going to write it right now. So I'll bounce around a little bit.
When do you know when it's time for a monologue? When I was writing, because I don't think when I write, monologues happen very frequently. They just don't occur in my work. And I'm just kind of curious how you know when it's time for a monologue.
Boy, I don't know the answer to that. I
don't know if there is one.
Somebody's got something they've got to get off their chest. That's pretty much it.
Okay.
Somebody's got something they need to say. And I think every monologue I've ever written is too long. Inevitably, I shorten them. But I don't write a lot of monologues either. They're not common, but I do have them in all of my full lengths. And in each case, it was the monologues in all cases are very emotional. Somebody's got to get something off their chest, usually.
Going back to where you were talking about writing for improv. So when you write your 10-minute plays, are you pretty much yes-anding the whole time, and then just whatever happens?
Yeah.
And just once you finish it, then you'll go back and edit. Is that how that works?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I almost never know how these plays are going to end. The short plays, I almost never know how they're going to end. I just get in there and go.
How more often than not, do you find that you're pleased with how they go once you do that?
It's 50-50.
Okay.
About half the time it's like, hey, that's pretty good. And then the other half, it's like, oh, that's no. And, back I go and I realize, no. So, a good example is the second Deuce play called Peer Pressure.
Yeah.
Peer Pressure has like 5 versions. Each one is complete, but only one of them ended up being Peer Pressure. Which one's in the anthology then? Now I'm curious. The one that I said, okay, that's the one. That's the one that got produced at the Pear. That's the one I sent you.
Okay, good. It's
actually, in my opinion, it's the funniest of them all. It makes me laugh anyway.
That's great.
But it's I took several turns, left and right hand turns before it ended up at the one that you saw.
When you do the improv thing, you get to the end. How many passes will you take before? How many iterations will you take before you're like, okay, like what changed from the first version of Peer Pressure to the last, for instance?
Oh my God, everything, including the peer.
Did you just thrash the whole thing and just start all over and then just kind of re-improv it?
No, the original idea was this was nothing more than a vibe. It was this idea of Deuce standing under a street light in a pier. I was thinking about the piers in Boston because as a kid, I was there a little bit. But that feeling with the fog rolling in and the foghorn in the background and a street light and somebody silhouetted under the street light smoking a cigarette with the trench coat with the collar pulled up. That's all I had. That was it. It's Deuce. Okay. I wonder who's going to come see him. And it took a while before the folks who came to see him ended up being, the folks who came to see him. And instead his visitors were, at one point it was a cop, and the very first version, it's just a femme fatale that comes out, classic femme fatale comes out. And that went nowhere. So it's which one of these took me someplace and which one of them, just kind of collapsed under its own weight. So it wasn't hard to say, wow, this thing is just going nowhere. I took a wrong turn somewhere. I need to be done here.
Do you have a favorite structure of play that you like to do? Do you prefer the 10x or the 10x, the 10 minutes, the full length 1 act, for lack of a better phrase for?
Well, yeah, I definitely 10 to 15 minute plays are the ones I like to write the best because of my situation. Okay. Where, I'm very fully employed during the day. So my writing happens, on the occasional Sunday, on a Monday holiday, on, maybe an evening in a hotel room. So short plays very much lend themselves to that. Writing a full-length play for me really involves, okay, I haven't worked on this in 2 weeks. I've got to read the last 60 pages. What the hell's going on? It's like, it's really hard to do. So just because of my circumstance, I find myself focusing on shorter work. But I'll certainly retire in the foreseeable future from my sort of professional career, if you will, and focus full-time on writing, and will definitely embrace full length at that point. For sure.
Let me play devil's advocate with that though a little bit as well, because do you find that not having been able to pay much attention to a certain piece, that 4 to 6 weeks later, you finally get to break it back open? Do you find that maybe you've had some ideas be able to simmer?
Well,
and or
yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah. Or do you find it's more hindering than anything?
Yeah, look, there's a thin line between fresh objectivity and full disorientation. So
fair enough.
So I frequently, when I was working on the full lengths, and I haven't written one in a while, but when I was working on those, I found that more than a week or two put me into the world of disorientation. Where the heck was I going with this? What was I doing? With the full lengths, of course, I have scene schedules for all of them charted out. So it's not utter. It's not like I've been hitting the head with a board. But at the same time, I was right in the middle of a scene. It's a tough thing to interrupt.
Sure. So I have 2 questions on that. Well, the first question is, what does that look like? Your scene structure aspect, that you've got it all laid out. Mm-hmm. So if you've got a full length play and you've got the scene structure, what does that look like? How detailed is it? What kind of notes do you have on that? Yeah,
I use a Word doc. I write in Word, and I just go ahead and if I say to myself, this play, I don't know that it's going to have 20 scenes or 18 scenes. I don't know how many scenes it's going to have. But what I do know is that I'm going to go ahead and create kind of a framework with scene 2 and where I think it's going to take place, and a few notes. And then I give myself a couple of spaces in scene 3 and scene 4. So, and then I just start writing. And that allows me to be able to skip ahead from scene 2 to scene 7 if that suits what I'm doing. Of course, it inevitably changes. No doubt about it. Scenes come, scenes go. That happens in the rehearsal hall, let alone, before the script is being read aloud. With the full lengths, it never stopped. We were adding and cutting scenes and dialogue, 2 or 3 days before we opened. And I think that's an experience a lot of playwrights have had, particularly with full lengths. That's pretty common, actually. But that's what I do. I put that framework together, and then I do my best to stay within that framework. But I also go with the moment, and I realize, well, I've got to add a scene in here, or oops, I've found myself in the wrong place. How did that character get there? Those kinds of things, logistics, whatever.
Are there detailed notes that you include in those scenes? Just like kind of.
It varies. Sometimes I've got a pretty good idea of what I want to get done in the scene. Sometimes lines occur to me. Okay. It's like, oh, it'll be really great, when that comes up for her to say this. And so I'll go ahead and just put that line in my notes. And when I get to writing that scene, there are the notes, and I just get going.
Do you lock yourself into certain ideas where it's like this has got to happen? I've got to make sure this happens, or are you kind of lenient?
I find the phrase "kill your babies" very distasteful, but it's a common phrase that's used in playwriting, and I guess it's used because it's accurate. I'm going to just find another way to say that, though.
Well, I was using "kill your babies" as well, and then I think it was April Littlejohn who was like, I think she called it "killing your darlings," which is a little less, visually disturbing. So
yeah, I can't get down with the phrase, but the sentiment is right on. You've given birth to this idea. There's been things that I've killed that were the reason I wrote a play, and ultimately it was like, well, nope, that ain't it anymore, and out it goes.
Did you find that it turned out for the better?
Yeah, almost always, pretty much always. Yeah, I've definitely latched onto ideas. I've latched onto ideas that I was way too slow in letting go. there's a laugh line in that first Frankie Payne play, No Good Deed. There's a laugh line that my wife and I laugh at every single time, and no one in an audience has ever laughed at, ever. And I still kept it in for us. But, generally speaking, if no one laughs at a line, it's coming out, even if I love it. And that's what you got to do.
Is that so? With comedy, I can kind of understand that. I understand when that comes in. When do you know that you got to take something out? It's time to kill it.
Well, I try to do development readings, and the purpose of the reading is to get the feedback and to hear what's working and what isn't, and I'll shape questions around those ideas.
Okay.
No Good Deed. The ending changed. We did a developmental reading of it, but it was a public developmental reading, and I had the good fortune of a couple of very skilled improvisers who do a lot of noir came to that reading, and they're like, "Dude, this ending is like, no, the ending made me angry." Ooh. Not me, the writer.
Right? No, of course.
Made these audience members angry. They're like, "No, you're pissing me off with this. You're pooping on the genre here."
Oh, geez. Okay. Wow.
And they were absolutely right. They're absolutely right. And we all saw it. Once they said it, it's like director, actors, producer, we were all like, yeah, that's right. The ending needs to be different. And we changed the ending.
Fair enough. The other thing I wanted to ask, and then we'll wrap this up, is you brought something up that I think is kind of important in this day and age, and that's kind of having a passion, but maybe being prevented from pursuing it because you have a full-time job that prevents you from fully immersing yourself in it. Mm-hmm. Do you have advice for anyone that isn't where you're at, where you've already started working in it, but maybe there's other people who are like, oh no, it's too late for me. I can't do it. And I'll never be a playwright, and because I've got this career that prevents it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a question of discipline, and I hate to put it so tersely, but that really is what it is. You just got to say, yeah, Sunday mornings from 9 a.m. to noon, I'm going to write. Maybe I'm just going to journal about my week. Maybe I'm going to just create some characters. Maybe I'm just going to write a page of dialogue. Maybe I'm going to write about the two squirrels on the branch of this tree outside my window. But for I think most writers who are active in it, not writing is kind of like holding back a bodily function. It's physically uncomfortable for me to not have that outlet. That's where it came from to begin with. If you don't have that compunction, it doesn't mean you can't write. It doesn't mean you shouldn't write. It doesn't mean you won't write. It means, okay, then grab yourself by the lapels. But what it comes down to is finding balance. And I think that's important for anybody, irrespective of playwriting or theater. Just balance is something that I definitely encourage. I've done quite a bit in my professional world, if you will. I've done quite a bit of leadership training over the years. And it's one of the things I always stress is when you fall out of balance, it's just not a healthy thing. Whether that's, too much work to the exclusion of your family or to the exclusion of your passions, too much of one thing to the exclusion of something else, to the exclusion of your health. I've just learned over the course of the years that between, family and health and theater and work, finding those balances, it's hard. It's hard. And it's something that requires a very, very conscious effort. It doesn't just happen. It's a very conscious effort. And the moment I back off that conscious effort, it stops. So what I would say is if you've got that itch, you need to just make a commitment to yourself to scratch that itch and recognize the importance of making a commitment to yourself and keeping it.
Where can people find your work or get in contact with you if they wanted to?
I am on the New Play Exchange, although I only have a couple of plays loaded on there right now. But I'll have more loaded on here in the weeks to come, between the full lengths and then some of my shorter plays. I'll get them on there. I can be reached via email at pabraver@yahoo.com. And I'm on Facebook. Come find me.
All right. Great. Well, Paul, thanks for coming on to this episode of the Playwright Spotlight. It was a treat.
My pleasure. I love talking about this stuff. Happy to do it anytime. Thank you so much for having me.
We'll get you back on.
All right. Sounds good.
Thanks for tuning into this episode of the Playwright Spotlight. Again, smash that like button, share this video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment down below, even if it's just to say hi. If there's a certain aspect of playwriting that you enjoy, please let us know down below as well. If you're listening to us on your favorite podcast platform, whether that be Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or any other of the platforms, be sure to leave a 5-star review and subscribe to the channel there. And in the meantime, and until we see each other again, keep writing.